Alright, it says I'm live. Hopefully the audio is coming through fine. I had to change some of the audio settings at the last minute here, trying to get that to be at a comfortable volume for me. I can hear me without hearing my industrial fan in the background, because that seemed to be hogging the microphone. Hopefully I'm coming through nice and clear. I'm seeing the microphone picking up. Seems to be picking up me just fine. I am seeing it bouncing up and down when I'm not talking, because it is picking up the fan, but in my earlier tests, that was not coming through. So if anybody actually joins in the comments, let me know if that is coming through, if you can hear the fan in the background. In my initial tests, the fan was effectively being canceled out. Alright, anyway, now that all that's out of the way, technical issues. Alright, welcome to the HUMANe Mind Live, episode 127, When Life Hands You Don Lemons. I'll be completing that thought later on in the topics here. Hopefully you should be able to figure out which one, but I'm going to be talking about a couple of things that came to my attention this past week. Some of it is from my personal reading. I've been doing a lot of personal development last couple of weeks and months. This means I'm getting into shape. I've got a daily exercise routine. Another thing that I've got along with that is not just listening to my usual news feeds, but listening to motivational speakers, people who talk about changing your mindset and becoming a better version of yourself. So self-improvement advice and from people who have been there, people who have been successful. And in addition to listening to people lectures along those lines, I've also been reading some recommended books from people I look up to as my mentors. In addition to the Bible, I've also added this onto my my daily reading routine. And so the book that I'm currently reading through is The Magic of Thinking Big. And so the topic there is defense of the ancients, because these are things that, two things that seemed very appropriate, even though both of them were written very, well, I mean, the Magic of Thinking Big isn't that old, but it's from the early 1900s. I think it was or maybe 1800s. I don't think, because he's still talking about like early industrial revolution stuff in that book. I don't remember the exact time period when that book was copywritten. I think if it's not early 1900s, then it's very late 1800s. I think it's early 1900s. I think it's like 1930s, 1940s time frame is when that book was written. I don't know off the top of my head. Anyway, so that it's at least, it's almost a century old, and yet things that he's talking about in that book, I was like, man, that still holds true for today. A lot of his optimistic views on the world, I was like, he had high hopes for the time that he wrote it, and I'm like, that was way before computers, that was way before all this technological advancements, and some of the stuff he talks about is like, some of the stuff he talks about as being, yeah, oh, this is, how much opportunity for advancement is like, that pales in comparison to all of the opportunities that surround us today. Yeah, it is head and shoulders. So I'm going to be talking about some of these things there, and that topic there is I've titled "Defense of the Ancients," which that is the name of it's more commonly referred to as Dota, and all MOBA style games came from Dota. Anyway, it's a reference to video games. Alright, and then I'm going to be talking about make lemonades. That should be pretty obvious what that's in relation to this week. And then I've got a kind of something that's kind of on the line between a heartbreaking situation, but also a positive look at things. And so when I saw that report, I was like, this scripture came to mind, and I was like, yeah, I mean, that's what I'm going to call that topic, is all things work together for good to them that love God. And then I've got Meh-pic rap battles of history. The real Southern strategy. I mentioned this last week, and for some reason, I did not have this video clip pulled up in my tabs when I was going through. But, I mean, we ended up going way over time anyway, so I didn't get to that video, and I'm going to get to it this week. Then we've got Secret Wars. Now that it's raining more than ever. And then the bonus clip at the end. So, that is 7:07. I do not have my co-host here. My brother injured himself either before the holiday weekend or during the holiday weekend. I'm not sure. He hasn't quite explained the situation, but he is kind of in a lot of pain, and so I'm keeping him in my prayers, but he will not be joining me because he's having trouble talking and just simple movements and breathing seemed, I don't know if he injured a rib, to bruise a rib or something along those lines, but sounds very painful. Do not envy the situation, and praying for a speedy recovery. Alright, so let's get into the first topic here. So I said, Defense of the Ancients, and I've got these tabs in the wrong order here. Alright, so this is something that came up during my Bible study this weekend. It's something that, so I'm going to be reading the King James Version, although when I do my Bible study, I use the New World Translation, which is the Jehovah's Witness Version Bible. And I know a lot of people aren't familiar with that, and when you quote from that, people are like, wait, what? That's not biblical, that sort of thing. But that's the Bible I read out of, and not just because I've been doing Bible studies with that organization, but because I've gone to the various online sources where you compare different translations of the Bible, and that is, and I'm not the, and I'm looking at, and this is something that they also pointed me to, is a lot of biblical scholars and experts that deal with translations, they rank it very highly, if not the highest, even people who aren't members of the organization whatsoever, as one of the most accurate translations of the original text into modern verbiage. And so that's the problem with some of these other translations, is sometimes the wording is a little clunky and old and hard to understand, but other times it's outright mistranslated to words that do not mean, or do not convey the meaning of the original text. But for the sake of the more familiar version, I'm going to be reading the King James Version, because that's the version everybody else is familiar with. And in this context, the verbiage is a little old, but the meaning is not changed here. This is from what I can tell, a pretty accurate translation of this passage. So it's James 3:13 through 18. It says, "Who is a wise man and endued with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his work with meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter envying and strife in your hearts, glory not and lie not against the truth." Now, I could stop right there and be like, that describes the war that is going on in our streets right now, is the people who have knowledge and wisdom. They are the ones willing to have conversations, and they're willing to show through humbleness and through just like, hey, I'm showing you the proof of what the knowledge and the wisdom I have. I'm proving these things to be true. And then you have the other side that does nothing but shout people down, destroy things, yell about how other people are more privileged than them. This is the envying and strife in their hearts. There is nothing but hatred and bitterness towards those who have, or those who are in a position of authority, or those who have the patriarchal power or privilege or whatever it is that they're claiming. And they are lying against the truth. And we'll get into that in the next topic here. So, starting with 15, this wisdom descendeth not from above, talking about the bitterness and envying and strife, but is earthly, sensual, devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. And we talked about that last week with the embodiment of Chaz. Chaz was built on the notion of envying and strife, and we saw within weeks every evil act happened in that society, in that small 6-block radius. There was murders, there were rape incidents, there was theft, there was racketeering going on, stealing. Like, there was every evil thing you can think of happened in that 6-block radius in a matter of weeks. It was like a microcosm. There's that episode of Futurama where Professor Farnsworth builds some nanobots and they go on to another planet, and these microbots evolve and so they are alive to watch the entire thing, and it shows that it was like seeing, and he was using that as proof of evolution on Earth, because he's like, yeah, we watched the entire thing unfold within days when it took the Earth millions of years. That's the argument made in that episode, and it's kind of what we were seeing in Chaz. Is like we saw the entirety of human societal's evolution occur within that small time frame. It was like human history and fast forward in that little area. Okay, so 17, but the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Wow, and you're like, because that seems, as far as I can tell, that's everything that people who are considered conservative or right-wing, with the exception of the white supremacists who are some reason labeled as right-wing, as far as I can tell, they are just as leftist as the down with patriarchy and Black Lives Matter groups. It's like, yeah, the white supremacists, they're saying the exact same rhetoric in the exact same manner, and just instead of putting blacks at the top of their hierarchy, they put whites at the top of their hierarchy. It's the same message. I put them all over there on the left. But everybody who is a decent person on the right, all of the people who are calling for sensibility, calling for practical solutions to societal strifes, pure, peaceable. They denounce the violence. They talk about peaceful solutions. They talk about stopping with all of the insanity, being gentle, right, full of mercy and good fruits. These are all things to strive for, and all things that I see amongst people who are calling for rational behavior in accordance with the truth. And one of those people, even though he's not a religious individual, one of those people who I saw, I've listened to his works, I watch his videos pretty regularly, listen to his lectures, listen to his call-in show, because I see these things embodied in what he teaches, and that person is Stefan Monolu. Again, not religious, but he embodies these things that are in line with wisdom that comes from above. Another person who did this, or at least for a while, although he's had some bit of a falling out, and hopefully he's on a comeback, is Jordan Peterson. Another person, again, not very well. Jordan Peterson is he believes in the notion of God or something like that, but he's very a secularist view of religion, not a personal relationship with God. So I guess kind of more of what the modern term of deist is. there, Steven Crowder, although he gets a little heated and angry, he exhibits a lot of these features when he makes his arguments and he talks about what the correct solution to deal with situations. And you can see this pretty focused on pretty heavily when he does his Change My Mind series, and he goes out and he talks to individuals. His attitude is different from when he's doing his nightly talk show thing where he's playing it up for laughs and he's going to extremes because it's more entertaining. But when he does a Change My Mind, he's more subdued, and he exhibits these attitudes and these behaviors. All right, and the last verse here is, "And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace." That's pretty self-explanatory. The goal is to search for peace, and if you listen to these radical extremists, these Antifa and Black Lives Matter, they don't want peace. They are not seeking peace. They are not trying to generate peace. They want destruction and chaos. Alright, I've got it pulled up here from the JW, the New World Translation, just because it's easier to read, but I think I'm just going to skip to the next thing. So, this is from page 163 of The Magic of Thinking Big. So this is a book that I'm currently reading through and currently learning from. And like I think I've said this previously, is originally when I started reading this, I thought it was going to be... and he had thankfully addressed this within the first few pages. He said, this is not, oh, just think positive thoughts and good things will happen. Because I've read a book that is kind of along those lines. It's called The Secret. Read through that, listened to the audio of it, and it sounds like new age mumbo jumbo nonsense. And it is just the, well, if you just think good things will happen for you, and you won't. Like, one of the examples they gave is like finding a parking spot close to the, wherever the store is. And well, it's like, if you just believe you're gonna find a good parking spot, you'll find one. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That's not practical. That's not something you can apply. That's not reality. And he addressed it in this book, because he talks about it at the very beginning. That is wishful thinking. Saying, oh, I wish something good would happen to me, is not the same thing as the magic of thinking big. Because it is a mindset that you get yourself into where you think that you can do it, where you think positively about things, but it's not that magically things will happen for you. It's because of your mindset, you look for opportunities. You actually start to think about, well, okay, if my possibilities are unlimited, what would I do? And you start to think, well, so I brought this up a couple of weeks ago, and it's like, okay, and I think I talked about this with one of my other brothers. No, that wasn't on stream. That was just a phone call I had with him, or a Skype call or whatever. But so let's say you think the United States is racist. Okay, so accept that as true. Like the whole system's out to get you because of your race, or because of your sex, or because of your poor, because you were born poor, or whatever the condition that you think makes you a perpetual victim. Think about the world from that perspective. No matter what you do to try to change your fate, you can't ever change it, because everything is out to get you. Everything is preventing you from becoming more than what you are. Right? Becoming more than what society has told you will be. And so you think you live in a very limited world. You live in a small world. You think small and you live small. And that's one of the ideas being expressed by this book. Now imagine if you said, okay, what if the world isn't out to get me? What if I'm not a perpetual victim? What if all the doors are open and I can do whatever I want as long as I put my mind to it and work for that? Well, when you think small and you live in this small, contained world, You're not looking for what you can do. You're not looking for what's inside your control. Because you, as far as you're concerned, everything is outside of your control. Everything is maintained by somebody else. You can't impact or change your reality. Whereas the magic of thinking big is, imagine all the doors and windows are open. There is nothing, no one that can stop you from doing what you want to do. What would you do? How would you change your life? How would you start living and acting? Your brain starts working on these things and saying, the possibilities are unlimited. I can do whatever I want. Okay, so if that's the case, I want to do X. And you're like, well, how do I get from where I am to my destination of X? Your brain starts working on the small, subtle stuff, and you start coming up with, oh, here's something that's in my control that I can change that will make it easier for me to get from where I am to X. And this is one of those, the book goes, it's a pretty lengthy book, I think like 300 page totals. I'm only about halfway through it. I'm reading it in smaller increments because it's something I've started to learn as I've been doing this, self-development. Is I've done this in the past where I've read through books like How to Win Friends and Influence People, but I read through the whole thing, we listened to the audiobook on a road trip to a convention. And so we listened to the entire thing over, I think it was like a 4 or 6 hour drive or something like that. And the book is so packed with information. There's so many concepts within that 6 hour time frame. And by the time you're done listening to the audiobook, you're only going to apply maybe one of those. And it's like this whole host of things that you should be applying all of it. Because, maybe he goes, I don't know the exact number within that book, like 1,000 things to do, to change, to do differently. And you only end up implementing 1 or 2 of them. The way I'm doing it right now is breaking it down into smaller chunks where there are 4 or 5 concepts discussed. And I'm like, okay, here's something that I can apply immediately and start doing this. And maybe you'll only start doing 1 or 2, but that's 1 or 2 of those 5. And if you're doing 1 or 2 things a day to improve yourself, you're seeing rapid improvements over time compared to trying to compress everything. And this is something else I also did, is like I used to binge read books that were self-development, personal help, and stuff like that. And it's like, well, there's so many concepts and so many things to apply that you don't end up applying. You only end up applying a small fraction of them. And so it's like you read through this 300-page book, and you might as well have only read 3 pages, because that's all you've taken out of that book. That's all that you've applied in your life to improve yourself. The way I'm doing it right now, I'm instead of applying like 1 or 2% for the entire book, I'm applying somewhere between 30 and 60%, somewhere in that range. And I'm seeing these rapid improvements, and I guess maybe you guys aren't seeing this on the stream, but I am seeing it personally in other things that I'm working on. And this is something, so I've mentioned this before, where I'm working on a bit of software that's involving compression algorithms. And I was really excited up front, and I started working on this kind of non-stop, and is putting all this time and effort into it. And I kept hitting these brick walls, and I'd keep chugging away, and it would, I'd like, okay, well, now I'm at a point where it's just, I just have to let this run overnight. And sometimes I would let a process run for 14 hours on my computer, where I couldn't really do much of anything else on my computer. And at the end, the results were meh. It was like, oh, that was a big waste of time, and I got disheartened, and I stopped. It got to the point where I used to work on it like several hours a day for weeks at a time, and then it just became, okay, maybe 3 days a week, and then it became just on weekends, and it became maybe 1 hour every week, and then it became like, oh, maybe 2 days out of a month where I'd work on this. And after I started reading this book, and I got about not even a tenth of the way through the book, I started getting ideas, and I'm like, I haven't tried that, I haven't tried that, I haven't tried that. And all of these new, because I started thinking about my situation of what I could do, and all of that disheartening that I had seen because I kept running into roadblocks, just kind of melted away, and I saw them as being the illusions they were. They were temporary obstacles to overcome, and I was thinking about it incorrectly. I was looking at them as roadblocks, and like, I completely went around them in most cases where I'm like, oh, I was going trying to go straight through this and kind of trying to ram through this wall, and I'm like, I don't even need to do that. I'm just gonna go around it, and then I'm seeing all of these improvements in what I'm doing, like, on a regular basis. And I don't want to get into too much of the details because this is kind of this might be a linchpin to the overall what I end up doing with this program. But I think I found a pattern that shouldn't exist. I think I've found, like, because, so I'm looking at things in a very different way. So I'm dealing with a lot of numbers and a lot of mathematical equations, and I stopped looking at them as numbers and math and started looking at them as simple patterns. And I'm like, I don't even need to do the mathematics. I can just do a sequence. And that's all I'm going to really say about it. But I think I've made a breakthrough in mathematics by simply viewing them differently. Because I've been scouring the internet for all kinds of things related to this mathematical concept, and I haven't seen anybody. I've seen people skirting around this and mentioning kind of core mechanics of it, but they always make it more complicated. And I'm like, I think I've removed all that complication, and I've got this really simple process that is very fast. And one of the crazy things about it is every other incarnation that I've seen of this in computer programming is specifically you can't make it multi-threaded. And so what that means is you have to do it in sequence. So if you have to go through a million numbers, you start at 1, and then you go to 2, and then you go to 3 and 4, and you have to do 1 before you can do 2, and you have to do 2 before you can do 3. So you can't skip to the million. What I think I have found is I can start at 1 or I can start at 1 million and I get to the same result. So I still have to go through 1 through a million, but the results of 1 million have no bearing on the results of 1. All I have to do is combine them at the end. And so I can have one computer working on number 1, one computer working on 1 million, one computer working on 500,000. And I can have, I mean, granted, with computers, you've got multi-cores and things like that. So you can have your computer do multiple things simultaneously. And this is what I'm working on right now, is getting this multi-threaded. But if I am correct, and all I have to do is, so I still have to run through a million combinations, but rather than doing a million combinations one at a time, I can do a million combinations 100 at a time, which means I'm doing it 100 times faster than I've seen anybody else being able to do this. So what I'm thinking is that processes right now that take supercomputers and distributed computing in order to make progress on, I think I can compete with that on my personal computer because of the technique and the method that I'm using, that I haven't seen anybody else use this method. And I see it now and it seems so clear. I'm like, why hasn't anybody else tried that before? It seems so obvious. So the way that I'm doing it seems so obvious. But the pattern I found was completely by accident. It should not be there, and I should not have been looking, I wasn't looking for it. I found it because I had a problem. And I was troubleshooting the problem, and I'm like, while troubleshooting the problem, I printed this out, and I'm like, wait a minute. What? That doesn't look, I thought I'd messed up the mathematics. But the more I looked at it, I'm like, there's a pattern that repeats here. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's just some kind of weird sequence. And then I saw the same thing. And then I saw the same thing. And then I saw the same thing. And it kept repeating. And I'm like, this pattern is a pattern that shouldn't exist. And in a computer program, especially with compression, which is what I'm dealing with, if there's a pattern, you don't, and it's consistent, you don't need to store the entire pattern. You store it once, and you repeat it, which I think is going to reduce like 50 to 70% of the stuff that I have to store to get my program to work. And I'm like, it's still a lot of work to troubleshoot and get around these, but man, like, this is stuff I wouldn't have found if I was still thinking small like I was thinking previously. Alright, so I spent too much time on this. It's already 7:30. Kind of going way off on tangents. It was like, these are, I wouldn't have even tried this method previously, because I was thinking along things. So, I mean, there was, like, the initial view of the compression is something that I thought was kind of out of the box thinking, but all of the methods and all of the ways I was trying to go about tackling that were things people were doing. They're run-of-the-mill simple coding that anybody who's, as long as they were working on they could have done it. But I think the techniques and stuff that I've developed in the process, like, if somebody else comes along and looks at this, they'll be like, what did you do? Why did you do that? Doesn't make any sense why you would do. And there are parts of it that still don't make sense to me, but they work. Like, stuff that I'm trying to figure out why exactly it's the case. I can't explain why it's the case. I just know that I'm seeing the results I want, and I'm seeing it really fast. Like I said, I used to let my computer run for like 14 hours at a time to get mediocre results. I'm now seeing those same results in milliseconds, and I'm like, forget the 80-20 rule. That's like if you do 14 hours reduced to something that takes less than a second. Yeah, that's, like, I'm seeing those types of improvements with what I am working on right now. So I think by the time I am done with this whole application, the sky's the limit, because I'm shooting right now for a compression time under 15 minutes and a decompression time in 5 seconds or less. I am pretty close to that decompression time, and that compression time I'm still off by a few hours. But considering it used to be 14 hours, and now that same process, like, that, I didn't save the entire 14 hours, but I just shaved like 12 hours off of the time, because it was one process that took 14 hours that now takes a couple of seconds, and then the other processes still take about 2 hours. So if I can keep that going, I might have a decompression algorithm that takes place near instantaneously, something that, you know, a computer can do within microseconds, and you just see the results, and you don't even, you know, you hit the button and it happens, and you don't even, because it's happening so fast, you can't even count to 1 before it's done. I might see that eventually. Well, who knows? Alright, so, done with that long tangent. That was completely unplanned in my... Alright, so it's already 7:34. So this is the part I wanted to talk about from this book. But like I said, just reading this book in the method that the manner that I'm doing it has opened my mind to so many new possibilities that months ago I saw as walls, and now I'm like, it's just a door, you turn the handle and you walk through. It wasn't a wall. I was looking at it incorrectly. Or, well, there's a wall there, but there's a big open path right next door, so why am I trying to get through the wall? Why not just go one step over, and then you can walk through the open air? Stuff like, those are metaphors, obviously, but that's what I'm seeing happen in the programming development that I'm doing. Alright, so the passage I wanted to read is, so he's talking about talking negatively about somebody in this passage. He's talking about gossip. So the passage I want to read here is, meditate on this thought for a moment. Taking an axe and chopping your neighbor's furniture to pieces won't make your furniture look one bit better. And using verbal axes and grenades on another person doesn't do one thing to make you better, or you a better you, or me a better me. And that is a lesson that people back then, people in the early industrial age, people before the computer, this is stuff that they were teaching in a university. He was a professor who wrote this book. I forget the author's name. I should know it. David J. Schwartz. Yeah. I'd never heard of him before reading this book, but he was a professor. He talks about his lectures in front of students, getting them to think critically about situations. This is the type of stuff he was teaching in his classroom environment. And this is the type of stuff that university students are doing the exact opposite of this. This is where we get the people destroying statues, destroying property. They have the opposite of this mentality. Not only just physically amongst objects, thinking that by destroying what somebody else built, thinking that that will make their stuff, the stuff that they can't build, or the stuff that they build that looks mediocre, better by comparison. The other thing is they also think that attacking other people, tearing other people down because of their race, or because of their, oh, you're not doing enough, you're not being woke enough, all of this nonsense. They really have it in their heads that that makes them look better because they're tearing somebody else down. That's the mentality that so many kids who are going to college right now, that what they're being spoon-fed is that notion that if they just tear down other people's stuff, their stuff will look better. And I just read this passage and I was like, that's the wisdom of the ancients that has been lost in our modern society amongst a good portion of the population. And we need to return back to that, those bits of wisdom, like from the Bible passage I read earlier, and from books like this, the things that people found out and understood and taught. Those are the things that need to be perpetuated, they need to be protected, and they need to be pushed to the forefront so that way humans can advance and become better. Not just as a society, but individually, every person can become better with these kinds of truths being fundamental, understanding these truths and applying them in their lives. Alright, so spent a little too much time on that. Let's get into the lemon aids. This video clip is just, gotta rewind it a little bit here.
But here's what I have to say. The Black Lives Matter movement was started because it was talking about police brutality. If you want an all Black Lives Matter movement that talks about gun violence in communities, including, black communities, then start that movement with that name. But that's not what Black Lives Matter is about. It's not an...
Yeah, I can't believe he said that. Man, like, how much of a moron is Don Lemon? Okay, so you have a movement called Black Lives Matter. And he said, oh, but that's not all inclusive. It's not talking about every black life. It's only those lives that are taken by police brutality. Those are the black lives that they're specifically talking about. And he's like, if you wanted a movement that cared about all black lives, you would start a movement named that. And it's like, that's... the Black Lives Matter name should be that. And he goes on to give a stupid analogy, but and Ben Shapiro kind of did one. He was talking about cancer, but one that makes more sense to me, again, dealing with mathematics and programming and all the stuff that I'm thinking about right now, that would be like starting a math club that was built around studying and just making different quadrilaterals. And somebody comes and joins your club of quadrilateral enthusiasts, and they make one, and you're like, oh, no, those aren't the kinds of quadrilaterals we make here. We make ones with right angles and equal, the sides that are equal distance, or sorry, that sides that are equal in length, and all four angles are at right angles. And you say, that's not quadrilaterals. Those are squares. Those are four-sided objects with right angles and sides that are equal in length. That's squares. Why don't you if that's all your club does, call yourselves the square enthusiasts. Don't say quadrilaterals, because a trapezoid is a quadrilateral. A parallelogram is quadrilateral. Rectangles are quadrilaterals. Why call your group Black Lives Matter if you're focused on a subsection of that group? Black Lives Matter is a superset that a subset hides behind. And the subset is like, oh, we only care about police brutality. But we're going to put ourselves under the umbrella of this Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter is an overall group. It's a superset that everybody can get behind. Now, a very small portion would be like, I want to, especially considering the people that Black Lives Matter often stands up for, it's usually those who have a criminal history, those who are a menace to their societies, those who terrorize their neighborhoods and then get killed because they are resisting arrest and because they're fighting for their life not to go back to jail for the rest of their life. Those are the individuals that are like, oh, they're black, let's get behind that, let's rally and, oh, police brutality against this person who has done nothing productive with their life. Those are the types of people Black Lives Matter. Now, had they called their group career criminals who die at the hands of cops because they were resisting arrest and they were while attempting to commit crimes, matter. If they, because that's the subset they're backing, right? Career criminals who happen to be black who die at the hands of police, who are trying to stop them from actively committing criminal acts. Those lives matter. If they named their group that, they wouldn't have people marching in the streets backing that movement. They wouldn't have people on TV backing that movement, because it's like, dude, really? That's the hill you want to die on? So instead, they couch themselves in a superset. Say, oh, Black Lives Matter. And Terry Crews is correctly calling it out and be like, you guys don't care when David Dorn died. You don't care when a 9-year-old is shot from stray bullets from gang violence. You don't care that I believe there was an 8-year-old that was killed because her mother was driving through Atlanta, and there's a section of Atlanta around the Wendy's where Rashad Brooks, is that the name? Yeah, I believe Rashad Brooks is the name of the guy who got shot at that Wendy's, killed by cops. They have formed a kind of a blockade around that Wendy's, and this mother didn't know that this was a hostile zone or territory occupied or whatever, was driving, got to the blockade, and was trying to turn around when they fired into the vehicle as if she was some kind of invading force. It's like, no, it's just somebody who went down the wrong road and was trying to make a U-turn, and you killed her daughter over that. And yet CNN doesn't care about that. It's like, oh, no, we only care about the black lives who are killed by cops. We don't care about that. That's some other issue that you need to go and promote, because even though that is a far more devastating problem to the United States and to the black community as a whole, even though that's far more pervasive, more people die because of that, more lives are ruined, more childhoods are destroyed, more children die because of that. Like, when you look at the amount of children who die at the hands of cops, you have one example, who was the 12-year-old that sawed off the end of their, it was either airsoft gun or a BB gun or something, to make the toy gun look like a real gun, went out in a park, started pointing at people, and making it look as if he was going to shoot people, and people in the park were fleeing for their lives. And the cops came onto the situation. They didn't know his age. They didn't know that it wasn't a real gun. They thought it was a legitimate active shooter situation, because based on the evidence, it looks like he's holding a gun. He's aiming at people. They are running for their lives. Cops come onto the scene. He is still doing what he's doing. They opened up fire because they thought he was going to actually shoot somebody. They didn't know it was a toy gun at the time. It was found out after the fact that it was a toy gun. It's a terrible situation. Should not have happened. But that is one 12-year-old. If you go back through, I don't know, 30 or 40 years of police history, think about the number of innocent people under the age of 18 who were shot. Maybe 18 is kind of, because like 16 and 17 is where you get to kind of murky waters where they can be treated like an adult in court cases and stuff like that. So let's say under the age of 15. Generally that's understood to be a child. Some of the people who are 16 and older, they're out driving. They're, a lot of these gang members are out there murdering and stuff at the age of 16. Like a lot of MS-13 gang members, they get started before they're 16 and stuff like that. So let's say under the age of 15, how many people in the last 40 years have been killed by cops, whether justified or not? Compare that with the number of people under the age of 15 who have been killed by black members of their community. There have been more people who died this year. You can name the people who died in a weekend that were under the age of 18, and so I only know that one. It was it's not Trayvon Martin. What's I forget the name of that 12-year-old kid. That's the only one I could think of in the past 10 years, because that's the one that they keep bringing up over and over again, is that incident. And you're like, but there have been. There was an 8-year-old shot in Atlanta, and the driver situation. There was a 9-year-old in Chicago, and that all happened over like the last 2 weeks. There were like I think there were like 4 or 5 deaths of black children under the age of 15, and like I think, and actually it's probably closer, where it's like so they're talking about 8, 9, and 12 and ages like that were killed like this month alone. There was like 4 or 5 of them. It's to the point where you, even in the most, like, where they can't bring them up fast enough on the conservative media, and people like Don Lemon completely turn a blind eye to that because it doesn't fit their narrative. It doesn't fit the propaganda story that they're trying to portray. Because he's like, oh, no, that Black Lives Matter. I know it's called Black Lives Matter, and you would think Black Lives Matter would mean all black lives, and it should be a movement to protect black lives from dying unjustly, whether that's at the hands of cops, or whether that's the hands of other black people, or whether that's the hand of white supremacists. They should be defending all blacks in all situations, but no, they're only focused on a small subset of blacks who commit crimes, and in the commission of those crimes are killed by cops. That's the only, and you're like, that is less than 1% of not only the United States population, that's less than 1% of the black community. So you're thinking, okay, is it 6% of the United States population represent black men? The number of black men who are shot by cops, like last year there was 9 total. And you're like, wait, 9 out of 6% of the U.S. population? Wait, let's try to do some basic math. The numbers, there are 320 to 30 million, so let's just round that off to 300 million. Let's use 5% because that's easier to do the math. So it's 5 for every 100 million, right? 5 million, 10 million, 15 million? 9 out of 15 million? Is my math correct there? Right, around 300 million. There are around 15 million black men in the United States. Of those 15 million, 9 were the victims of police brutality. Like, even if the cops did, even if all 9 incidents were police brutality, you have 9. Now, if you can't include this year, you're at maybe 20. 20 out of 15 million? Meanwhile, there are hundreds of people, hundreds of black men and women and children who die every year at the hands of gang violence. Hundreds a year. But they're focused on the 20. But they put themselves in the umbrella of Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And so I think Don Lemon is saying the quiet part out loud, without realizing it because he's an absolute moron. And Terry Crews is exactly right. Terry Crews did say, oh, there's something else he said in this. I don't remember if it's after this or before this.
All encompass same thing, brutality and injustice, working on that issue. And if you want to start that issue, why don't you
look at the organization?
Police brutality communities when they kill each other.
Yeah,
very true.
It's the same thing. That's not important.
Listen, I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying they have more brutality. It bothers you. We're equal.
We'll see you. Terry, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. And about criminal justice, it's not about
might have been a
many
little
people
early.
who are working in those communities is the equality for black violence, or unfortunately,
you know, it's a whole other, because this thing cannot go down. Running these, look, speaking up for me, you know, lives matter. Even wear a mask.
But Terry,
they want to kick you out.
And respond to what you're saying on Twitter. So I don't think you should be surprised by that. I have a skin as tough as an armadillo, because I think you should backlash. You know, people are gonna. You're a high-profile person.
Yeah,
you're writing things out there. You know you're gonna get backlash. You know people are gonna respond to what you're saying on Twitter. So I don't think you should be surprised by that. I have a skin as tough as an armadillo because of what I do, and I think maybe you should adapt that.
This guy is seriously telling Terry Crews, oh, you need to get thicker skin. Terry Crews said, I'm standing on principle here. I'm living by this. You got to make sure. The main point of his tweet, so he had two tweets. The first one he was saying, you got to make sure that in seeking justice for a bad situation, you don't turn this into a black supremacist movement, because that's what he is saying Black Lives Matter has become. It's become a black supremacist movement. He's like, that's just as bad. And people gave him backlash, and he's like, yeah, no, this is a hill I'm willing to die on. I'm not moving from this. This is a stance that is correct, and I agree 100% with Terry Crews on this. And here's Don Lemon saying, oh, you gotta understand, you gotta develop thicker skin. And it's like, he said this is a hill he is willing to risk his career on. He is willing to die on. I don't know if you understand what that means. No, not your paper thin skin, Don Lemon, when you're on your program crying every night. He said, if I lose everything I have because of this, I am standing on this principle. When have you ever done that, Don Lemon? When have you ever risked your career for a stance? When have you ever taken a position where you could stand to lose everything? Right now, Terry Crews is on America's Got Talent. He's got films and TV shows under his belt. He's got a whole bunch of things going on for him. He could lose his job over this because people are saying that what he was saying was racist. People are saying that they are calling him all kinds of names, the same way that they would Candace Owens and Larry Elder and individuals like that. They're throwing those slings and arrows at Terry Crews. And you're like, this could be an instant, like he could lose his job on America's Got Talent because people are going to try to mob America's Got Talent and say, oh, Terry Crews is a racist. I can't believe you have him as a host on your show. They are trying to cancel him over this. And he says, no, I'm planting my flag. This is something we need to defend. This is where you draw the line. And he's exactly right. And based on this conversation and other interviews, Terry Crews is a man of God. And that's why he has the principle he has. He's like, yeah, race does not matter. You stop viewing yourself by your race. You are more than that. We are all God's children. I don't remember if he said that exact phrase in this interview, but he said it in other places, if not directly in this interview. But he says we are all created equal and trying to live up to that. That doesn't mean black supremacy. That doesn't mean white supremacy. That means your race is irrelevant. Your race does not matter. You should all be on equal playing field. You should treat people as individuals. And that is the stance that you should plant your flag on and say, yeah, this is a hill I'm willing to die on. So, good on Terry Crews for sticking to his ground, and shame on Don Lemon for just existing. I don't know. Alright, here's the next story. This is the All Things Worked Good. So, this is pretty... It starts out a little upsetting, so I'll go ahead and play the first little bit of this.
Problem that bothers me, you says Black Lives Matter. I've worked here part-time, Plus, I'm a part owner of this store. You said Black Lives Matter. Why don't you choke me? I'm black.
Tell him, sister.
Look what you did to my store.
Tell him, sister.
Look! Look what you did to my store.
Tell him, sister. That's right, because I got they back. These are my
Look.
dudes right here. Good
Look at
men.
the things you've done.
Good men.
Look!
For Black Lives Matter.
We've been here all night cleaning up. All night cleaning.
And you got black people
Now.
standing right here with them. Black
Tell
people.
me
That's right.
Black Lives Matter.
Exactly.
You lied. You wanted to loot the store. You needed money. Get a job like I do. Stop stealing. This is the neighborhood. We're trying to build it up, and you tearing it down.
Yeah, that is an amazing attitude that woman has, and so thankfully, like, that's kind of tragic. Like, her store was wrecked, and she talks
Hey, I'm
about
Dave Rubin,
that on
and it's
Dave
Small
Rubin here.
Business Week here on the Rubin Report. Joining me today is Mrs. Lucy and Mustafa Al-Saidi of Valentine Deli Corp of Bronx, New York. Mrs. Lucy and Mustafa, welcome to the show.
Thank you. We're glad to
So,
be here.
Mrs. Lucy, I think everybody knows you at this point. I know that you probably wish they knew you under different circumstances, but we
Yes.
just played the viral video of you. So before we do anything else, can you guys just describe the nature of your relationship? I thought maybe you guys were partners in the business exactly, but it seems like you're in the midst of figuring out how you're going to work together with the deli.
Yes.
He's asking you.
No, he said us. So I'm giving you
Okay. Before all this, we had a plan to do a place for her and inside the store to do what do you call it?
well, I mostly catering, sewing,
And then
Um,
masks and dresses.
different little things, baskets that could be made for Mother's Day, Father's Day, Valentine's Day, shirts being printed, a lot of
Names and
different
pictures,
things.
yeah.
Catering also.
And then before we get into it as partners, this thing happened, and then it just stopped us from doing anything.
So
Yeah. So, I mean, they're kind of... So basically, they had kind of come up with an arrangement where she was going to open up a shop in the building that he either owns or is renting, so she could run her business outside of there. So she says later on in the interview, she's been a part-time worker for him, and he talks about all the things he's done for going above and beyond for other employees. Like, one of his employees got sick with COVID. She drove him to the hospital, stayed with him for hours. And then when the guy who was sick offered to pay her, she said, no, I don't want your money, and kind of turned it down. It was so, I mean, this is a good-hearted, warm-natured person, and she got wronged by Black Lives Matter, terrorists trying to present themselves as peaceful protesters, going around and looting in the name of, George Floyd or whatever it is this week. Destroyed her business opportunity. She was building something, and all of that got thrown out the window when the shop was completely destroyed. And then, thankfully, there is a silver lining here, which I don't remember when exactly they get to that.
And sit. You don't have to be afraid, trying to look at your pocket or look at someone trying to steal from you or anything like that.
All right,
He offered out of his pocket to help me. Who is going to do that for you?
my friend Nicole Arbor set up the GoFundMe for you guys. And
Let me
I
tell
think-
you something.
I skipped to the right part.
Yeah.
Miss Nicole is a blessing, okay? Without her, this would have never happened. Even my dream would never come true.
Sure.
Just because I'm starting at home, it don't mean that it's not going to happen. Because it's going to happen. And I want everyone to know that those who gave, those who helped, those who stood by me, and had to stand by me, my dream of getting this business and hiring minority peoples in the neighborhood, those that been affected by this pandemic. They went back to see if they had their job.
Yeah.
They don't have a job. I want to help them. Come on, we got work to do. And by bringing them in, putting their expertise together, all of us together, we could create a good business. It's not my business, but it's the kingdom business.
Man.
I want to be a God kingdom builder. And that's my dream. And it's going to happen with the funds or without the funds.
All right. So that's pretty awesome. She said it's not about the business, it's about building the kingdom. So I don't know what religion she is, but I know that she's got her heart in the right place, and she's trying to serve God to the best of her abilities. And the thing that was kind of mentioned at the beginning there is kind of a pseudo celebrity / YouTube personality, Nicole Arbor, saw the clip of her talking about the business, started a GoFundMe. Man, I am such a baby. Ugh. I don't know why I'm tearing up. So started a GoFundMe. Community rallied around the cause. Raised thousands for her to start a business after so many people tried to take that away from her. And so right now they've got a lot of funding, and they're trying to figure out whether that she's, like she mentioned, whether it's starting out of her own home or whether they can find a place, because right now, even if they go and rent a place, there's no guarantee that that place won't also get broken into and looted. So that's what she was talking about earlier. Allergies, dust in my eyes. No. Man, what is this, like, talking about Don Lemon crying on every... It's like, but this is kind of happy. Yeah, anyway. Man. Because that is the good that the U.S. does. When we see somebody in need, when you see our neighbor disadvantaged, this is a modern day Good Samaritan, although it's not just one Good Samaritan, it's a whole community saying, these are the good people that the U.S. enables to come and help out their neighbor when they see them in a bad situation, when they see them beaten up and lying in the ditch on the road, where they go out of their way, above and beyond, to help alleviate their situation. And so while this lady didn't get beat up physically, her dream was destroyed overnight. And within the next day or the next week, it's back open again because of the contributions of people around the United States coming in together and all contributing to that fund. And you know, this is the verse that came to mind. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose. And then there's another one from Genesis. This is Joseph when he's talking to his brothers. So he says, "But as for you, you thought evil against me." Man. Pull it together. Pull it together. You thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good. And the rest of that is kind of specific to the situation Joseph found himself in. But the same principle applies. What Satan sought to do evil to this woman, God turned it into a blessing for her. Because, man, God, my eyes, why am I such a baby? Supposed to be, what's that called? Sociopathic tendencies, where you can turn off your emotions when you, and I've done that, but for some reason, I don't know, maybe it's my reading and personal development has built up my conscience and my, you know, my emotional intelligence. Maybe that's the right word. So maybe the reason I was able to turn it off in the past is because I had seared my conscience or buried my emotions so deep, and now because I'm bringing them to surface because I'm working on that, trying to make myself a better individual, trying to care about others more and all that sort of stuff. Maybe now that's the way you're supposed to be. I used to be able to just be dead inside. Now for some reason, no. Past couple of months and years, everything's getting to me. But yeah, it says a very good example. Yeah, what Satan sought to use for evil, God is using, because like I said, that fund has raised a lot of money for her business, and so maybe she would have had a somewhat successful business. She would at least had a place to do business from, but now she's got a whole lot more starting capital than she would have originally, and so maybe they can expand their business much faster than they would have otherwise. So it's one of those things, it's a case where even though the situation is terrible and she had to spend all night cleaning up the mess, it's looking more and more like this is a situation that would otherwise be terrible, but because of the goodness and because of just her heart and her personality that has reached out and touched so many people, and so many people are in a position that they're willing and able to give and help her out, they just kind of rallied around her and supported her, and this is God using something that was designed for evil to bless somebody who is doing good in His name. At least that's the way I see it. Man. It's already 8:07. I got a couple other stories, but the rest of these are just kind of, should be rather small. This is the Meh-pic Rap Battles of History. I saw this in my YouTube feed a couple of days ago. I'm not gonna play the whole thing.
You see? It's a revolution. Capitalism's days are numbered.
Then there goes our freedom. If socialism wins, America loses.
We have nothing to lose but our chains.
And our civilization.
Come on.
Learn some history. Private property and free markets built modern-day society.
Yeah, and modern society is the problem.
2 from Arch of History.
Nice to meet ya. My name's Ludwig. Call me teacher, the master of markets, the Austrian boss. You don't like profits? Well, let's talk loss. The problem with your plan is nobody wins except Stalin, Pol Pot, Ho Chi Minh, Lenin, Mugabe. Remember Berlin? They built a wall to keep their people in. Your theories have a rotten foundation. Built on control, not cooperation. Centralized power completely corrupts. Real people suffer, violence erupts. Your system depends on the very same people you decry as greedy, bourgeois, and evil. If we're not fit to run our own lives, why would you expect our votes to be wise? If you really want to help people rise up, unleash the free market, let their lives up. It was capitalism, not a socialist plan. Saved billions in India, China, Japan. Everyone has a unique purpose and plan. No one solution can survive.
Right. So that's all I'm gonna play. So it's you can see this over here on the right. I think that's visible. Yeah. So the lyrics in it are pretty good. Actually the production value is unexpectedly high. They got a lot of people involved in the audience and showing up, and there's a little something towards the end here. I don't remember where exactly that was. I know it was towards the end.
Immigration. The earth is boiling, and your solution is more production, more pollution, more cheap trinkets.
Yeah, right
See
there.
them versus us.
Alright, so if you didn't recognize it, that's Jeffrey Tucker. He's a pretty famous libertarian, Austrian economics. He's involved in cryptocurrency and a lot of that. He's in a lot of these forums talking about it. He's the head of some institution. I think it's actually the institution that helped bring about this video. The AIER, which is the American Institute for Economic I forget what the R stands for. They may not show on here. Oh, okay. They got the lyrics and stuff on this page. American Institute for Economic Research. Yeah. So I think Jeffrey Tucker is the head of that organization, if I'm not mistaken. But so my only problem is the two actors who are the main guys in this. They're not as the actual music and the actual delivery of the lyrics is not as good as some of the other attempts. Like, so this the Keynes and Hayek one is my favorite still. Again, not quite as good as the epic rap battle of history guys. Those guys are pretty phenomenal. Everything those guys do, and like not only like the lyrics are just non-stop, but I'm gonna play a bit of a clip from the Keynes and Hayek. This is the second one.
It's time to win it. War from the top, war from the ground. Let's listen to the beats. Keynes and Hayek going down.
Jobs are a means, not the ends in themselves. People work to live better, to put food on the shelves. Real growth means production of what people demand. That's entrepreneurship, not your central plan.
My solution is simple and easy to handle. It's spending that matters. Why's that such a scandal? Money sloshes through the pipes and the sluices, revitalizing the economy's juices. It's just like an engine that's stalled and gone dark. To bring it to life, we need a quick spark. Spending's the lifeblood that gets the flow going. Where it goes doesn't matter, just get spending flowing.
You'll see slack in some sectors as a general glut, but some sectors are healthy, only some in a rut. So spending's not free, that's the heart of the matter. Too much is wasted as cronies get fatter. The economy's not a car, there's no engine to stall. No expert can fix it, there's no it at all. The economy's us, we don't need a mechanic. Put away the wrenches, the economy's organic.
Yeah, there was another line in this one that is really, really good.
And still digging. Don't you think it's time for a switch from that hair of the dog? Friend, the party is over. The long run is here. It's time to get sober.
Are you kidding? My cure works perfectly fine. Have a look, the Great Recession ended back in '09. I deserve credit, things would have been worse. All the estimates.
Yep, there it is.
It's a straightforward graph when the nation's at war.
Master, that's why I'm the hero.
Creating employment's a straightforward graph when the nation's at war and there's a draft. If every worker was staffed in the army and fleet, we'd have full employment and nothing to eat.
Great line. And so most of the quotes in this rap are actually from a debate that Maynard Keynes and Friedrich Hayek had during their lifetimes. And so the fact that they're combining these all and making them rhyme, granted some of the words are changed to fit the rhyming pattern but a lot of the core concepts of things that they actually said in the debate are handled in rap form. So this is a much better version of it. What the other guys were trying to kind of copy that. They did a pretty good job. It's actually a really, the lyrics are spot on, talking about the problems between socialism and capitalism. I don't think it quite was done as well as this video. And again, both of these are kind of meh compared to what Epic Lloyd and Nice Peter do for Epic Rap Battles of History. Anyway, so this is a topic I forgot. I mentioned in the topics, I had the video link in the last video. Did not have the video queued up. And
how about we talk about where I've actually been and what my actual motivation was for leaving politics? Well, firstly, I have some really exciting news that many of you had no idea about last year, which is that I was married and pregnant, and I just found out about my son right before the release of Borderless. I have always kept my cards close when it comes to my family because unfortunately the modern political coliseum seems to have zero boundaries whatsoever or respect for people's privacy. But I did decide to share a tiny bit this January on my Instagram just because it's something that has brought me so much joy and is such a blessing in these crazy times. It was pretty hard to not at least put a bit of it out there for you. But definitely it was a very special thing for me and an important thing for the first part of my son's life and his birth to be just for myself and just for my family. None of the social media or the world's eyes on it. That was just for us. Another thing I did was I took some time to get back into education and to nurture a more contemplative part of my soul and my faith, and really recenter what was important in my life, like family, friendships, and community. It is definitely an interesting experiment to take a step back from the internet for at least a few months, see what's left of your life when you take away the social media, the internet fame, and the online tribes you're a part of. Have you built something meaningful outside of that? Is your purpose still there when the screen is off? There was definitely a point where I don't think I could have said yes to this, and there are probably far too many people that are Gen Z or millennial like me that have been in that boat before. Which brings me to another point, and that is family was not the only reason I took a step back. I had planned to take an extended break from the internet and media for a while anyways, just to get my head out of the fishbowl and observe with a sober view the world that I was a part of. And to be real with you guys, the world I was a part of, especially earlier on in my YouTube career, was a very unhealthy one. And I mean, to be fair, most of you have probably been on Twitter before, so pointing out the toxicity of political or even just internet culture in general is probably the least shocking thing you have heard this year.
Okay, I'm not going to play the whole thing again. It's a 17-minute video, but she does talk about she's coming back and she's going to start working on documentaries again. If you haven't seen Farmland and Borderless, excellent documentaries, and despite them being labeled as alt-right or white supremacist by the news media and things like that, they actually have a very even-handed approach, and she tries to get the full story as much as possible, and she talks about this in this video a little bit, about when you're only seeing one side, you come across with a narrative, and you come across with your view of what's really what's really going on. But for the full story, you need to have both sides, so that way you can come to who's telling the truth, who's lying, what's really going on. And if you watched Borderless, there is a obvious deep compassion for the people who are being taken advantage of, people who are trying to leave their country for a better life, and instead they are being human trafficked into other countries and then abandoned, and now they're stuck without a passport, they have no opportunity, they're living on the streets, and they're in a worse off situation than they were. And they were promised all of these great things, and they were promised, government subsidies and jobs, and yet now they are in a worse off situation, and she's interviewing people in this situation, and they're like, yeah, we were better off in the country we left. We were lied to and scammed into giving it all up to come across here illegally, and now we're stuck and we can't go back. So there was that human, and you're like, that's the story that you wouldn't get unless you're actually looking at the truth of the matter. You're trying to get as many perspectives, you're trying to get everybody's situation. You're trying to get the full story, and she's really good at that. And it was also some of the stuff that she was doing earlier, so was it 2017? I can't remember if it was 2017 or 2016. I know 2017 is when I went through when I liquidated my retirement accounts, and I started a business, and I sunk several $1,000s, over $15,000 when it was all said and done, into the project that is now in hiatus indefinitely until I can find some other way to fund it, which was supposed to be Funfair. And I come up with so something that just came to me within the past week or two. So I called the project Funfair because there's one side of it that is funding, the other side that is the maker, the actual content, and you put them both together, and then you have your funding mixed with your actual social media content, which is something that Facebook is trying to do, but it's all slapped together at the end. They're putting band-aids on they're band-aids upon band-aids. I don't know if you've ever done any kind of development. This leads to spaghetti coding. This is, since it's not built for that with the initial architecture in mind, it's so clunky, and it comes off half-baked. And YouTube is adding stuff on there after the fact as well. Like now they've got the Join program, which wasn't around in 2017. You know, where you can subscribe. Not only can you subscribe to a user, but you can join, and then you pay a monthly subscription fee for whatever extra perks. I don't know what exactly that is. So my idea was all of that back in 2017, and could have been and it was all integral to the system. It was the very core of the system that I designed and built. But I think when I do actually launch it, once I actually get this compressor and I end up selling it and making enough money to get Funfair off the ground, it's like, dude, why didn't this occur to me at the time? Fairground and Funderground. You have two separate entities, and when you put them together, it becomes Funfair. But you have both of them operating. You can have Fairground all by itself, and then you have Funderground. And I'm like, dude, those are awesome names, and to the best of my knowledge, are not taken, so maybe I shouldn't have said them out loud. Because at least I've got the .com and the others for Funfair, but I haven't quite claimed Funderground and Fairground. But I will by the time it becomes relevant. Yeah, so I will, not this month, but I will be purchasing both of those domains here in the next couple of weeks. So anybody listening, don't try to take it from me, so that way I have to pay money for them and all this sort of stuff. Yeah. No, nobody's gonna. There's not enough people that watch this to make that even much of a threat. But if somebody else does take it, oh well, I'll just stick with Funfair. But I think it's awesome to have the idea of people who just want to use one aspect of it. They'd have somewhere to go where they just deal with that one aspect of it. So the idea is basically like mixing PayPal with YouTube or Facebook, and so you can have everything that PayPal would do, you can do through Funderground. I like the name Funderground. I'm like, man, why didn't I think of that? You just add ground to each of them. Makes them sound better overall. Anyway, so what happened to her is she got kicked off of Patreon, and I can't remember if that was like at the end of 2016 or maybe halfway through 2016. She got kicked off of Patreon because they were making lies about her, and the head of that organization actually said manifest observable behavior, or basically mob. Yeah, she got kicked off because of the mob rule. Terrible. Like, I don't know if that was a cry for help from the founder of Patreon or not, but that was the catalyst that's got me thinking about, okay, so what if we did one on our own? What would it need? What would it require? How could we do this? How could we build a better mousetrap? And I spent several months and several $1,000s building that better mousetrap. And all it would require is a bit of support and funding from external sources, and I couldn't get that. So I ran out of funds to sink into that project, and it remained dormant. I had hoped that once I had the fundamentals of it, and I was able to demonstrate the project, I was able to say, like, okay, this is what we want to do, this is what I think it, I can demonstrate aspects of it, and then nobody was there to listen to it, and everybody had, like, oh, well, we all have been complaining about YouTube and Facebook and Twitter for years, and we're still sticking with those platforms. It's like, really? You got battered wife syndrome with these platforms. Now, I obviously, it sounds kind of hypocritical because I'm using YouTube. None of my stuff is monetized on YouTube. I'm doing YouTube specifically to make sure that I've got a log or a journal of my ideas, and just so I can get my ideas out there recorded, and if anybody is potentially listening to them, they could hear them and be like, oh, dude, this guy knows what he's talking about, and even back then, he was on the ball on these sorts of things. But I don't have very much of a foothold, I don't have much of an audience, so at this point, yeah, YouTube is just kind of a fun little extra that I'm doing. It's not I'm not trying to use this as my career, when a lot of people who use this exclusively as their career, their means of funds, those are the ones complaining about the system, and those are the ones who have the political sway, those are the ones who have the audience and could do something about it, and yet all they do is complain about YouTube and then stick with YouTube. Alright. What's the next topic? Oh, okay. This one is Secret Wars. So Secret Wars is a reference to Marvel's. Presumably Phase 4 is going to be talking about this. So in the Marvel Universe, Secret Wars is there's been an underground war happening behind the scenes between, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's most likely with the storyline they're going to go with is mutants have been here and they've been in the Marvel Universe for a long time. It's just they've been shielded from S.H.I.E.L.D. and from other organizations and from being found out because of Professor X, because he can control minds, he can make people forget things, he can erase memory. So he can hide mutants from being discovered and basically make sure that when they do have battles, so it's not only the mutant war between Xavier's forces and Magneto's, but Secret Wars gets into the Skrulls and Super Skrulls and things like that. So those are the shape-shifting race from Captain Marvel, those were the basic Skrulls who could mimic other people and pretend to be someone else, and they can also copy memories and things like that. Super Skrulls can copy powers, and depending on the storyline, some of the Super Skrulls they can take on somebody else's appearance and also their abilities. Another Super Skrull just has the abilities. Like, one of the Super Skrulls has all the abilities of all the Fantastic Four for some reason. I don't remember exactly how he got them or why, but there's various forms of Super Skrulls. But they've been having this secret war with the mutants and with possibly the Fantastic Four that's been going on unnoticed because it's being Men in Black memory wiped. Anyway. Cool. It seems like an interesting direction that Marvel could be going in Phase 4, although I think they're still going to try to milk that franchises for all the money they can get out of them, but I think they kind of peaked at Endgame, and I don't know if they can actually get anybody interested in coming to those films with the same vigor that they did for the Phase 1 through 3. Anyway, Mr. Reagan came out with this very long video. Again, I'm not playing the whole thing. I'm only going to play a couple of bits of this intro here.
We must support our local police. Nothing can be quite so damaging to police morale and efficiency as converting every arrest into a trial of the policeman instead of the criminal.
The secret origins of racial division in America.
Mr. Reagan.
Now, there's many reasons for racial division in America. Obviously slavery, obviously the Jim Crow laws in the South, civil rights movement, all that kind of stuff. But we hear about that every day. From CNN, from the mainstream media, we always hear about this stuff. We know about this stuff. But there's another reason why there is such severe racial tension in America, even to this day. It sounds a bit outlandish. It sounds conspiratorial, like some crazy theory. But I'm going to give you video evidence. I'm going to give you names. You can do all the research yourself. You can see all of this history is absolutely true. Black Americans have been used for decades by Marxists to try to create division and unrest in America.
Yeah. So he talks about in this video that this is all kind of new to him, and I'm like, really? You did? Is this not widespread information? I thought this was kind of common knowledge, but maybe it's not as common as I thought, because this is stuff that I had heard from, great, maybe that's because, our dad was a little bit more in the, not quite tinfoil hat, but there was a lot of conspiracy stuff that we were aware of that most people weren't told about, and I remember growing up around that kind of stuff is, that sort of, the moon landing is fake sort of stuff, which I'm still, I don't know where I fall on that one. Like, I think it might have been faked, but I don't know. I don't know enough about the actual facts there. Again, like I was talking about the Lauren Southern situation, that's something I have one perspective of it, but it's mostly because I've got information all from one side, and I haven't done enough research on both sides to get the full truth there. But the information I'm presented with, as far as it was all faked, seems to be pretty substantial. And, the major one being the Van Allen belts, which even more modern. There's video clips of the guys talking about the Mars mission where they're trying like, oh, yep, we just got to figure out how to get past the Van Allen belts. I'm like, wait, you would had to have gotten past them to get to the moon. How did you? Why don't you just do what you did to get to the moon? So they seems like that's fake sort of thing. But going back to I mean, there's also several films called The Agenda that were produced by I don't remember if it was a representative, Republican, obviously, or if it was a senator at the time who talked about this communist infiltration. I've heard lectures about McCarthy, right? McCarthyism, and everybody compared McCarthyism to like a witch hunt sort of thing. And it's like, no, he was actually under, like he was saying that, you know, Marxists had infiltrated governments and all these positions of power. He was underestimating how devastating and how far Marxists had infiltrated everything. And the idea that, because I mean, he was talking about Hollywood organizations, and there's documentation to back this up, that there was organizations where they would go out and actually encourage actors guilds that were devoted almost entirely to indoctrinating people into Marxism and getting them to, you know, they'd get careers, or they'd get directory positions and all that sort of stuff because they're a member of this guild, and the whole time they're being indoctrinated with Marxism, and they're only those directors and actors go on to only allow other Marxists into their career path. And it's like, dude, it's this huge circle jerk of Marxists creating more Marxists. And then we saw it also in academia, and so academia was the big place that McCarthy overlooked when he saw the Marxist infiltration, and that's where they've got the strongest footholds, and they're creating generations of it. And so Mr. Reagan goes on and talks about this, because this video clip, I forget when he said it was from, like the 40s or 50s, but
Communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart, and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. We must not be led into placing the blame for the riots, the civil disorders, on the Negro people of our nation. Even those few who are promoting hatred and violence in the black communities are not themselves the cause. They're merely being used by forces far bigger than they are to promote the violent phase of the revolution in America. Hoping to avoid further violence and bloodshed, the public is to be pressured into accepting measures that will...
I mean, man, that's spot on. And this is stuff from the 1969 is when this video was recorded and came out. And then there's this other guy, I believe we've mentioned him on the stream before, Yuri, I think you mentioned his name.
Have a look at this interview with Yuri Bezmenov from
Yuri
1984.
When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students exposed to the idea.
Yeah, educate one generation of students, because he's mentioned like academia and just the federal education program, like what's it called? Federal Education Department? It's just called the Fed? That doesn't make any sense. well, whatever the Department of Education is for the I think that might just be it, Department of Education, for the United States, has been infiltrated by people with either outright Marxist or pro-Marxist agendas, and they're educating entire generations, and this is going through, and like, everything they sought to do to destabilize the country, and it's like, yeah, this has been a war that's been going on since at least the 60s, and it's still raging on behind the scenes, and it's being completely overlooked while people are paying attention to the more immediate concerns, and they're not seeing all this background stuff. It's like, man. So I'm glad Mr. Reagan came out with this video. For me, it's a whole, like, with the exception of the first guy he showed, the black and white clips, I don't think I've ever seen those video clips, but everything that he was saying in those video clips, I've heard from other sources, either in books or lectures and all this sort of stuff. It's like, yeah, that's spot on. That's exactly what's going on, and that's exactly why we're seeing all of these disjointed forces all moving as if they're of one agenda, but they're all moving independently, as if it's sort of like the film Inception, right? Where it's an idea or a seed planted, and the people with that idea or seed planted in them, they think it's their own idea. And like, oh yeah, I came up with this myself, but it's like somebody else planted those seeds, and that was all, like, the KGB have documentation. I'm like, yeah, we're going around, we're planting these seeds, and in 15 to 20 years, they germinate and they become independent cells, and they act of their own accord, and they all move as if they were in unison, as if there was somebody manipulating them, but they're all independent. They're just focused on the same agenda. They're focused on it from different perspective, but the outcome's the same. Like, man, it is scary stuff, and it's scary how effective these tactics are, because seeds that were planted in the 60s germinated and spread and built more seeds, and all of this is, so even though the KGB has been, well, I mean, I guess the KGB is still around, but even though the USSR has collapsed, and everything they did as far as this, it's gotten to the point where it's almost unstoppable, because it's acting on its own, and it's acting independent, and all of these cells and all of these seeds are germinating and producing their own seeds of their own. It's become this independent process. That is, there is no central authority pulling the strings. It's all decentralized now. So it is very, very hard to combat that ideology currently, and that's what we're seeing. All of this strife and all of this destruction and all of these people who should be at each other's throats, for some reason they're all combined around the ideology that, you know, it's Black Lives Matter, but they're also promoting all of this socialist stuff, and it's like, oh, down with the patriarchy, but also all of these socialist policies. What? Oh, how dare you say anything about Islam, but also all of these socialist policies. Wait, what? How is feminist, black supremacists, or even just people who see race as a problem, why do all three of these groups all also throw in all of this socialism stuff? And we also saw this with Spencer, right? Richard Spencer. He was like pushing all this, you know, national, you know, we need to make U.S. all just white people and kick everybody else out policies, but he's also promoting socialist stuff. And I'm like, dude, all four of these groups should be fighting against each other, and yet all four of them are all pushing the same policies. And it's like, that indoctrination is so strong with these groups that it's gotten so pervasive. I think what we're seeing right now is it's at that tipping point where they're like, okay, here's where the destruction comes. Man. But it's always easier to destroy than it is to create. So. Okay, so it is already 8:40. Man, have I been talking for an hour and 40 minutes? I'm such a windbag. Alright. So, this is now that it's been raining more than ever. This is awesome.
Loser! Diego!
What the hell did we do now?
What was that?
The end of the world, November 25th, 1963.
And where am I now?
Dallas, 10 days earlier.
I need to find my family.